today, we're ending with a talk that reflects both practice and perspective. 10 lessons from 10 years of running an XR enterprise studio. We're joined with Alex Coulombe, CEO and studio head of Agile Lens, an award-winning immersive design studio based in New York City, specializing in virtual reality, augmented reality, and real-time technology. With a background in architecture, theater, and emerging technology, Alex has spent more than 15 years developing spatial design workflows, enterprise XR solutions, and immersive live performances for clients ranging from Royal Caribbean to the Royal Shakespeare Company. He's also a Unreal Engine Authorized Instructor, chapter lead of Unreal NYC, and a frequent speaker at leading industry events, including SIGGRAPH, AWE, South by Southwest, and Unreal Fest. It's a fitting way to conclude the program with insights drawn from a decade of building at the intersection of spatial computing and human-centered design. Please join us welcoming Alex.
Thank you. Sorry, sneaking up behind because I'm going to refresh the page. Do we got the mic here? Great. Okay. So a lot of talk about vibe coding today, and what's fun is I just finished vibe coding this 10 seconds ago. You're all going to get access to the GitHub when I'm done, and you'll see exactly when the last commit was pushed. I'm going to do one final refresh here to make sure we got it, hide my UI with all my little special buttons, and let's dive right in. All right. So another thing I'm going to point out is there's a lot of text on these slides. I don't usually do that. I don't want you guys to read the text. The text isn't for you. It's for my friends who aren't here. So when they look at this, they've got some idea of what the heck I was talking about. But welcome, welcome, welcome. Very excited to be here for the closing session. I've had a wonderful day. I hope you all have too. Yeah, what an honor to be here. Thanks to Harvard XR for inviting me. So first thing you need to know about me is that virtual reality was very much a power-up for me. By the way, do we have sound? I've got all those fun little sprite effects. Okay, great. Virtual reality really unlocked a big thing for me because I came from a background where I didn't think that I would ever get to combine all of my interests together. That paired with eventually my love of Unreal Engine, going on a little while later now. Yeah, shooting out all my little Unreal Engine projects. That really became something that felt like an incredible power-up for me. And now I'm here kind of reflecting on these last 10 years. Great excuse to go back over the past decade and think about what I've learned in this crazy old world of XR. Because my three interests going through school, and even when I was younger as a kid, were architecture and theater, as well as various emerging technology, video games, real-time technology, et cetera. And I had a lot of trouble imagining what I might be able to do that could even combine two of those. When I had friends back in 2010 when I graduated from architecture school with my minor in drama, they said, "Where do you think you'll be in 5 years?" And I said, "I really don't think that job exists yet," and I was hoping to God it was true. And now, beyond my wildest dreams, that's been the case thanks to XR. Because what do all these three things potentially have in common is they are inherently spatial. These are mediums that require you to engage with space in a way where they all enhance each other, and it very much is like one of these lovely Venn diagrams. And so Agile Lens has gotten to work on a very wide variety of projects over the past 10 years, and we're going to dive into some of them today. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to go back in time. Not quite that far back. I wasn't even born by then. But we're going to have a little sprite Alex here, if we can get him to come up. There we are, with his little VR headset. You'll notice he doesn't have a beard yet. He's still very young, still very innocent, doesn't know what the world's going to bring to him. And we're going to start him down here at kind of like a little player start area in the Agile Lens monocle. And we'll start all the way back in 2016. And so what we're going to do is kind of progress through these years and try to have a little lesson of something I learned each year that I hope will be useful to you. This is very specific to my experience in the trenches. It's not universal, but maybe in that specificity, we will find some universality that you may find useful for your own work. Lesson number one that I came out of the gate with, and 2016, of course, I'd already been using augmented reality since my thesis in architecture school. I'd already been using virtual reality since the Oculus Rift DK1 in 2013. And I was so surprised how many people were trying to pull experts from film and video games into the world of VR, because I was surrounded by theater people. By that point, I was working at Fisher Dax Associates as an architect specializing in designing theaters. And those were the people who understood right out of the gate how to utilize this new wave of consumer-facing VR in the most compelling way. Because again, spatial, you don't have the same cinematic language of cuts and wide shots and montage. You have the ability to guide an eye with light and with, emotion and expression, and the way you use color and all these things that actually, once again, have a lot of overlap between architecture and theater. You can't force someone to move through a building in a particular way, but you can guide them psychologically, and so virtual reality offered a lot of those same opportunities. So I'm going to whiz through some of the projects we'll pull up here, but I'll try to say at least one thing about each one. No time to go into the details of like how did this project come about and all that kind of thing, but just related to the lesson. When we worked on the shed at Hudson Yards, we were looking for very quick wins to figure out complicated things. And so in this case, this was a little VR experience I made where you have a 4-foot stick and a 7-foot stick, and you walk around the grid of the space trying to figure out what equipment will fit, because some of it needed 4 feet of clearance and some of it needed 7 feet of clearance. And at that time, I already knew people who were putting, I want to say, way too much time and effort into building really complex and, optimized VR experiences beyond what was actually needed. And I was in situations where it's like, we have a design meeting in 2 hours. Alex, can you go into Revit, do a section box, and like pull this over so that we can just go and explore the space a little bit? And that was a lot of the early VR I was building, just like how quickly can we get this out and find something useful, which again made a lot of sense to anyone who had done off-Broadway theater and knew like, oh no, we're missing a prop. We just got to like get some tape and some cardboard and like, here's that prop now. And again, a lot of people who I knew who were coming from other backgrounds didn't necessarily have that improvisational spirit to just jump into how we build this stuff. I got to work on Kenneth Branagh's Macbeth at the Park Avenue Armory. Again, we're actually a little bit before Agile Lens started. This is when I was using VR with Fisher Dax Associates. And this again was like very quick. Kenneth Branagh's bringing the production from Manchester, England over to New York. Park Avenue Armory, for those who don't know, it's a giant venue the size of a New York City block. They used to do like drills for the War of 1812 in there. And you're seeing right now the non-VR version, because it was very hard for us to record the VR version. But I was showing these people, Rebecca at the Park Avenue Armory, eventually Kenneth and his production team, how to engage with the project and cycle through design options and try different seating options. And we had all these great discussions about what you could see and what you couldn't see in a way that would not have worked with any other medium. Being able to just lean a little bit and say like, is this obstructed? Can I see enough of the extras? That was all became very, very important as we made some very quick decisions that just helped everyone in a stressed out production environment breathe a sigh of relief. Similarly, I started to find that there were people who were finding me because I began to speak at some events like NYVR in New York City starting in 2015. And I gave a talk about some of the ways we were starting to use sight lines to figure out how theaters could better be designed using virtual reality. And there were some folks from a company called Bravo Media who sought me out after a talk and said, oh, we're curious if we could use your system of checking sight lines, but do it with projectors, because we need to do this crazy Church of Stephen Colbert thing. And we need to figure out how many projectors are we going to have in the Ed Sullivan Theater, and what do their throw distances need to be. And so I basically ended up building a projector simulator that ultimately ran on the Gear VR, including the more accessible, I think this was like a WebGL version. So that was fun. Next lesson, going right over to 2017. It is okay to pivot. Sounds a little bit crazy that we're 1 year into the company and I'm already like, you can pivot. But a lot of my expectations when Agile Lens started were false. I was really hoping I was going to get to be right there with a bunch of amazing architects, the same way you hire like a structural engineer and an MEP consultant and all these like specialized members of a team. I wanted to be, running the like XR consulting team for massive architecture projects. And the short version is like, that wasn't going to happen. There wasn't money, there wasn't an established need for it, and anything in an architecture or construction environment where it isn't needed and there's not a document saying this has to be a member of the team, usually didn't happen. Spoiler alert, 10 years later, that actually happens more. And now we're part of the EDC Council in New York City, and we are actually like an XR expert on record, and we do get to do more of this now. But at the time, I was like, okay, I'm chasing kind of a dead end. I went and spoke to a bunch of architecture firms. I couldn't get them to see the real value in paying for VR services, even though we could give them all sorts of ways that it would save them money in the long run. They're like, well, we have no way to pay you now, so unless you're willing to wait 5 years to receive that payment, we probably can't do it. So I started to find other opportunities that were related, but maybe a little bit different from what I initially expected. We had FX Collaborative at the same building as us, and I said, hey guys, can I create a nice digital twin of the Statue of Liberty Museum, and that became a nice portfolio item for us. I did it for free, but it was useful. Then I started to find companies that just needed like simple, real estate tours, marketing, no design, more interested in kind of the interactive features of how you do pre-sales than the actual design side of it. But it was a good opportunity to get my feet wet with, creating 360 video and different kinds of ArcViz experiences on a wide variety of hardware. It also led to me playing with tilt brush and sketching a lot because I wanted to communicate ideas very quickly, spatially, the same way architects will often do these little napkin sketches. I wanted to make that spatial. And as I started to put out some of these videos, again, not being paid for most of this stuff, it started to attract some attention. So I ended up at Autodesk University along all these heavyweights from like IKEA and Autodesk and all these big companies on panels, and I got to do this big discussion, all because of some stuff I'd done on the side, not even the ways I was making money with my business. And then that attracted the attention of Unreal Engine, began that relationship. They did an article about us in 2018, and then it kind of felt like we were off to the races. And so I was pivoting the company, but still making sure I remembered what excited me and what I was passionate about, and was finding time to do those things in my free time. Lesson number 3, going up to I think we're in 2018. So at that point, kind of an interesting position to be in. I was so burnt out on trying to convince architects. There was that year in 2016, I think I visited 80 different architecture firms trying to be like, here's our presentation. Aren't we cool? Look at all the ways we can help you. Does anyone want to work with us? And the answer was almost always no, unless we were willing to do it for free or for like $5. So then I ended up in this funny situation in 2018 where people and companies were coming after me and saying like, hey, I saw this presentation you gave, I saw this thing you did, we'd really like to work with you. And there was a perception, not a wrong one, that Agile Lens was basically just me. At the time, it was like me and some independent contractors, and I had the support of my sister company, Fisher Dax Associates, because I co-founded Agile Lens with my former boss. That's a whole other story. But a lot of the folks and companies who were approaching us, they're like, we want like an Alex Coulombe freelance rate, and I needed to charge a company rate because I've got like partners at this point and all that. And then similarly, we had projects that were coming in where they did think we were like a proper established studio with like 50 people, and then it was really hard to be like, I don't know if I can spin up enough independent contractors quick enough to actually make this project work. So these were some growing pains, and I liked having people come up and be like, we want to work with you. The reality of making that actually into something that could sustain a business was much trickier. So very briefly, this was another cool project for Intel. We didn't have to do any work to get this. Glimpse Group, who again runs NYVR, they came after us and said, hey, we'd really like to do something crazy for Intel with the i9, so we got to do stuff with like particle effects and skeletal animations, and it was great. But also because we weren't the direct client of Intel, we were a subcontractor, there wasn't really any follow-up. I mean, we got some nice press again from Unreal Engine. They used my name, which was nice. They didn't have to do that. But it felt like a one and done kind of thing when I was really hoping like, oh, we're going to be like just making tons of XR stuff for Intel. And in many cases, a lot of the projects, especially where we're subcontractors, that isn't the case, even if the company that subcontracted to us does keep working with that particular client. Samsung approached us, thanks to Nancy Bennett, who's a wonderful woman who was always very generous with giving recommendations for who different companies should work for. Samsung wanted to do a 360 platform back in 2018 using their stereoscopic cameras, which were very cool. And so they had us doing a demo for Gear VR and for phone, where you could actually stream 360 content. And it was cool, except like the project moved so fast, I didn't give like a good quote, and this was one where like I really needed a bigger team, and I ended up doing way more of it myself when I wanted to like bring on more people to help. And so it didn't reach quite the levels of what I wanted it to. And we mitigated expectations by saying like, well, as a test, as a prototype, let's not actually stream the video, let's have it local just so we can play with the UI and the UX and how the Gear VR version differs from this. But it did feel like one of these situations where this could have become more of an ongoing relationship if we were able to really impress Samsung out of the gate with what our team could do. Though again, there was also the problem that I gave them way too low of a fee at the time, and I still, even now, are still like, how much should that cost? Is that like a 3-figure thing or a 7-figure thing? I should probably learn more about that. Another fun thing, last time I was in Boston speaking at a conference was actually 2018, Bob Fine's VR Voice conference about healthcare. And there, Philip Rosedale was also talking, and my talk was about all the exciting potential of VR for live theater and performances. And Philip saw that, and we had a chat afterwards, and he basically said, how big's your company? And I was like, big enough. And he's like, well, in any case, do you know the New York City theater community pretty well? And I said, yes. And so he said, why don't you go and assemble like a super troupe of New York City theater folks who are really going to engage with this technology in a meaningful way? And so I did that, and I brought on all sorts of amazing folks, and we did all these experiments with avatars and different kinds of performance venues and like doing serious things and comedic things. And we made some great discoveries, like what kinds of avatars were working well in Philip's platform, High Fidelity. How do we do things like use scale and flight and all these things that just make it feel like a more magical experience than what you could do in the real world. But the biggest takeaway was you want to find people who have improv training, because the tech breaks, and people who have improv training know how to roll with those punches and keep things going and still put on a good show. Other folks would be in the middle of a Shakespeare monologue and notice something was wrong with their arm, and then they would just kind of be like, is someone going to fix my arm? I don't want to keep going now. So that was really useful. And what you're going to start to see as another lesson here is picking up this kind of R&D as you go, because we're not being paid a ton of money for these, but we were learning a lot about different ways that we could learn research, do things that were really good R&D that would piggyback and leapfrog us into the next project. So everything felt like we were building on this pile of IP that became more and more useful as time went on. And even back here, I was good about protecting our IP. Anytime there was a contract, I made sure, for whatever reason, to ensure that anything we developed, we were keeping the technical IP. Clients would often get the creative IP, and we would license the technical IP to them, which allowed us to continue to use our code and everything we did over the years. Next lesson, going to 2019. All the best XR experiences I've worked on had a lot of people coming from other disciplines. And the first time that I really got a good sense of this was actually all the way back in 2008. David Rockwell, who runs Rockwell Group, a very well-known company in New York City that does architecture and theater and all sorts of great stuff. I got to be his chaperone for a few days back in 2008, and we talked about a lot of his design philosophy, but also in particular, the JetBlue terminal at JFK was just opening, and he told me a lot about how when thinking about how people would move through that space, they didn't just want to work with architects and interior designers. They brought in a choreographer. They brought in like theater people. And again, wanted to think spatially about how people would move through here, because architects are often concerned with the more static elements of a building. A choreographer is going to think more about how people move. And that was a really banner year for me to be thinking more about how different people coming from different backgrounds could collaborate together. Syracuse did this kind of, I think it was kind of a one-off. I don't think anyone did it after this, but they did this school for interdisciplinary design where they wanted industrial designers and landscape architects and interior designers and set designers and everyone to come together to approach the same kind of problem from different perspectives. And so this was like a, how do we make this new bus route around Syracuse look really interesting? And I loved working with a team where everyone approached it from a different angle from the other charrettes and design competitions I'd been a part of, where it's all architects and we're approaching it from like slightly different angles, but we all have the same training, so it's not as varied as other people who are coming from much other backgrounds. That's what I want to say. And then that also led to me being like, I want to do more things with other design disciplines. So I started doing set design with the Syracuse Black Box Players, and I did a production of Equus. And it was cool because they were excited by the fact that I could like do things with 3D modeling and real-time technology that they couldn't do. But also even then, it was like I was having trouble conceptualizing how big certain things would be. And in retrospect, I was thinking like, man, it would have been great to have virtual reality, and we could have like gone through like my 5 different ideas for how this could have worked, and we could have been like, okay, that's too big, this needs to be a little bit smaller, that's too bright, and we just would have gotten through these decisions much, much faster. The first project that I got to work on, and this was, I should mention, this one made no money at all, there was no budget, but it became really good internal R&D fodder, was Kevin Laibson, who eventually came to be one of my employees, and Allison Morgan approached me saying, hey, we've got this really cool idea for a ghost speed dating experience, and they wanted to keep the tech side of it really minimal because they had a very strong creative vision, and I said, that sounds great. And so they just brought all their friends to like create these monologues and create all these reasons why they should be the ghost to haunt you for the rest of your life, and I just tried to sit back and let the creative kind of go wild here, and then just be there like figuring out what bells and switches I needed to pull in order to make this happen. And what was great is they approached this very differently from how I would, and were very fast to pick up on things like the limitations of Magic Leap. Everything looks a little transparent. The field of view is, not where you want it to be. So like, how about we do these volumetric captures, and then we like keep people within the frame of where you're still gonna see their full body as you need to from above the table. And it was just such a joy to work with them, and it just got this wonderful pool of people, especially in New York City, that I felt like I could call on to be playtesters and QA and design consultants and all sorts of different people to come make our projects better in a way that I think a lot of other people wouldn't. Hey, we're at 2020. It's time for Alex's pandemic beard. There we go. Continuing along. And it just does it again too. Yeah. Vibe coding for the win. In 2020, of course, we're now in pandemic times, and I, at this point, was getting very exhausted trying to keep up with all the features of Unity and Unreal together. And so what I found that I wanted to do was just pick one. And the folks at Unity had been kind of, I want to say, absent. Like, I just never got much engagement from them. Whereas the folks from Epic Games were super, super friendly, and the DevRel team was amazing. And every time I saw them, they were like really excited to know what we were working on. And so I thought, now I'm just going to try committing to Unreal Engine to make sure that I can just be the best I can at this one tool. But at the same time, while I was learning Unreal Engine and becoming an authorized instructor and all those great things, we were also still going down this rabbit hole of like, how do we make VR theater accessible? And so we decided to explore WebXR with our friend Brendan Bradley. We did some work at the Brendan Bradley Integrative Technology Lab at NYU, teaching one of his classes, which was a blast. And Mozilla had this free platform called Hubs, which is WebXR. And of course, the benefit of WebXR is you can use any device, no apps, it's just a browser. You can do it in VR or out of VR. And this became a really cool R&D ground for different people to do these little one-act festivals of like a 5 to 15-minute show that would work inside virtual reality. On the Unreal Engine side, it was great because I just found that especially architecture projects we were working on that were nearing construction, we could get so close. You can see like the construction side there versus what we were doing in Unreal, and it just felt so nice to be able to show our collaborators like this feels like stepping into a time machine, and you really do get a sense of the scale and the colors and the lighting. So I was really happy that I started to like really fine-tune my expertise and then the expertise of some of my collaborators of what we could do with Unreal Engine in VR for architecture and theater, which of course became the industries we were most focused on. Then something fun started to happen. We had companies that became interested in sending us things. And so we had Lenovo and Xsense, and Lenovo wanted to see what we could do with their computers, and Xsense wanted to see what we could do with their mocap suits. And Unreal Engine wanted to know what we wanted to do with metahumans. So we got early access to that and started to play around with using an Xsense suit to mocap metahumans while someone is in VR watching it. We wanted to get a sense of like, is this just creepypasta and totally uncanny valley, or is there something here that could actually be really compelling? Because my Nexus moment was, once again, 2008, studying abroad in London and being very, very close to a bunch of world-class performers. And I wanted to see if we could start to recreate that feeling of like powerful live performance proximity from within virtual reality. And this, even though it was R&D, we're getting sent free hardware, we're not getting paid, this became a really interesting way to start to explore that. So one of the lessons here is, if a company wants to send you free hardware, it's not really free, like it's a quid pro quo. They're gonna use you for marketing. You wanna make sure that you're using what they're giving you in a way that's gonna be useful. But think that through. And you can often ask too. You can just say, hey, company who's never heard of us, we're doing this cool thing. Do you wanna send us some stuff for free? And they might actually say yes. So then something else we started to do in 2020 was begin to productize. I've already talked a little bit about how our IP was really important to continue to build up as something that we wanted to continue to use for other projects. And we had enough theater work, for example, like on the design side of theaters, and then the pre-visualization of sets and whatnot, that we realized that we could actually start to build a tool. So rather than making all these bespoke custom applications for every client and project we were doing in the theater industry, we could start to do something that was like all about import any theater you want from any 3D model, and it's gonna automatically give you like all the seat people that you can click on, and you can get sight lines, and you can annotate things. And we're just trying to figure out, what have we learned from working with so many clients over the years that starts to solve a common problem of theirs. So there's another lesson too. See what your clients all are kind of overlapping with, and try to see if you can solve that together for one thing that benefits all of them. And so that continues to evolve. Lesson 6, coming up to 2021. This was a really important business lesson for me because Agile Lens, even up to this point, was still mostly me plus independent contractors. And I had some really good reliable ones, but they weren't always there for every single thing I needed them for. And that did lead to some tricky situations where like I felt totally overwhelmed by a project because there were certain meetings or deadlines where there just weren't enough people. And so when we got to doing some of these projects in 2021, 2022, I started to just burn out a bit, and I realized the only way this was going to work would be if I could find clients who were willing to give us a certain amount of money up front, which I could then use to like reserve contractors. And eventually reserving contractors grew to enough money that I could actually hire people full time. And that's the way that the company actually became sustainable. And it did a good job of cutting out the folks who just, wanted free consulting or just wanted to like follow a project down for a little bit, but they were never going to pay that much for it. When we started asking clients to give us some kind of retainer up front, it really helped us find out who was serious about taking their project in a really powerful direction, and they weren't riding some kind of hype train or just wanting to talk to us for a while. Christmas Carol, this is a project we did for 5 years, and it started as a collaboration with Actors Theater of Louisville. This is an example of us kind of upselling them because they said they had a certain amount of budget. All they wanted to do was do these like projections on their actual theater scrims for the Ghost of Christmas Past. There's Gregory Maupin playing Scrooge, and we're like, you know what? You guys are asking us to do like, characters and costumes and metahumans and lighting and environments. Could we just do a VR version of it, and would there be any budget for that? And they said yes. And so that became this wonderful alternative version of the show starring our good friend Ari Tar, and we got to continue to use that year after year as a bit of an R&D sandbox for pushing the limits of what we could do with live performance in VR. With The Orchard Off-Broadway, we're running low on time, so I'll just mention briefly, this was with Mikhail Brishnikov and Jessica Hecht, and had a lot of really complicated things we had to do with OSC and triggering events in the virtual version of the show, which took place in this lovely digital twin of Chekhov's brain, I guess you could say, as well as the Brishnikov Arts Center. And we found all these great opportunities to use OSC and all these tools that eventually came back around to benefit literally every other project we did. So anytime you can have a paid project that is going to give you exactly the kind of IP and R&D that you can use for other projects, that's a really fantastic place to be in. Protect time, for we're not sure yet. I used to feel, especially when I started to gain this reputation as like an XR thought leader, that like I needed to have the answers to everything. And I felt nervous if a client was like, can you do this and this and this? And I always felt like I wanted to say yes. And the truth was that oftentimes I wasn't sure yet. And so I started to also create this bubble, especially when paired with a deposit of saying like, we need 1 week, 2 weeks, a month, whatever it is for the project, to actually dive in and do client-specific R&D that is really going to help us figure out whether or not this is possible. Running very low on time, so I'll just mention Waldorf Astoria. We needed to get a metahuman performing as like a concierge in a hotel. Lincoln Center, we had to figure out how to do this like very robust digital twin of the railing system to make sure that wouldn't make people sick if it was designed that way for actual hall. And then we go into Four Seasons, this crazy 5,000 square foot holodeck that we have in Austin, we have one in New York, and this was like, needs to be hyper photoreal VR with ray tracing, and there were all these open questions. We had to do 3D printing and complicated networking things, and we were able to figure it out, but only because we were able to convince the client to pay us enough in advance to give us the R&D time we needed to make sure that everything was gonna work with our fun little 3D printed antlers. Body of Mine, you can hear more about that another time. Vodafone, same thing. This was useful for doing some crazy AI stuff with in-world AI. Lesson 8, complex projects are thrilling, breeding ground for scope creep. Be careful when you have projects that you're really excited about because you can end up working on it more than what you're getting paid for. And we have a lot of fun at Agile Lens working on crazy projects, and if we aren't tracking our hours well, we don't want to go off to our client later and say, hey, we spent 3 times as much on this as we said we were going to. This came from a Google grant. We went far beyond the scope of like what was actually going to happen with the Google grant, so we had to pull ourselves in a little bit. Finally, or almost finally, lesson 9, perfect is the enemy of best. We found that as we got better and better at creating these XR experiences, that we were being harder on ourselves than the client, and we would tie ourselves up in knots trying to correct a problem that the client had not pointed out. So be careful about that, because if you get it to 98%, what you think is 98%, the client will oftentimes think it's 100%. This happened with our Royal Caribbean project with a VR hot air balloon ride. It happened as we did our work with the Royal Shakespeare Company, and we're trying to build the most perfect, beautiful tools for them to do rehearsals and shows. We had a similar incident at our holodeck in New York City with a client. And then here we go, lesson 10 out of 10, build a community. We did this with Christmas Carol over 5 years. We had all these nice things that people said about the show over time. And then we started to do more things in the New York City area, like we went and decided to run Unreal NYC, which is a wonderful community. You should all come to our meetups, join the Discord, all that good stuff, as well as a fan version of the Halcyon Galactic Star Cruiser project. We have Kara Murphy in the audience, who was a huge part of that. And this has just been a great way to get to know people who are also interested in these tools. You put things open source on GitHub, and it just attracts a lot of cool people. Put things open source on GitHub. And as we wrap up here, we say, that's it. Here's the 10 lessons. Boop, 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 boop. But have I learned anything in 2026? Yes, I have. So there's one quick bonus lesson here. We find, now that we've been in the industry for a while, that everything continues to change, and you just have to be able to roll with those punches. Don't get caught up in different hype cycles. Stay focused on where your expertise is, and just continue to find the clients and the partners and the collaborators and the artists who make you feel like you are headed in a meaningful direction. Use the tech for what you want it to be for. Never do things just for tech's sake, and you will be in a good place. So here's a quick look at that journey. And I really, as you can tell, got excited about the theme of today's conference of from pixel to voxel, hence my little fun pixel avatars here. And I thought, well, really, I mean, I gotta go full voxel, right? So there we go. We got a full voxelized version of my guy with quite a mullet. Like, look at that 80s mullet, yeah? And so there we go. So thanks everyone for watching. Here are a bunch of QR codes to scan, including this presentation. If you want to show it to your friends, show it to your kids. Unreal Discord community, UE5 training. We have the only authorized training center in New York City. And thanks so much for listening, and see you all at the happy hour or social networking thing, whatever we're calling it. Thanks.